What's going on, folks? Ted from Immersion here, and we officially have a response from Wizards of the Coast on the terms of the OGL, the SRD, and what One D&D will be. Now, there is some stuff in there that regarding licensing and royalties and stuff of that nature, so we're going to read through it. And as I said, I think the biggest thing is we got an answer, right? That's probably the biggest takeaway from this is a lot of people were concerned, although it may not be 100% what we thought it was in, how bad it was going to be, but it also may not be as sunshine and rainbows as other people may seem to think. So we're going to go ahead and take a look through it, and we're going to read through it. And I think I'm actually going to, if I'm able to in the future, there are some folks I've met that have a lot more understanding of legalese and contracts, and I'd like to bring them on here and interview them and have them read through this and let us know if there's something more than meets the eye. So let's go ahead and take a look. So here you can see it says OGL's SRD and One D&D. This was uploaded about an hour ago. It says, we love the interest and passion the community has for D&D. We love D&D too. So when we see the D&D community concerned by rumors and misunderstandings, we want to clear the air and share the facts with you, even if it's a little bit earlier than our original plan. Which, again, I think we could say is good. You all matter to us, and we want to provide transparency on how D&D will continue supporting third-party creators. Will One D&D include an SRD and be covered by an OGL? Yes. Now, there's things to consider, but we'll go from there, right? First, we're designing One D&D with 5th edition backwards compatibility, so all existing creator content that is compatible with 5th edition will also be compatible with One D&D. Second, we will update the SRD for One D&D as we complete its development that is informed by the results of playtests that we're conducting with hundreds of thousands of D&D players now. So, on face value, good news, right? That sounds great, and I'm all for that. All right, we're going to... Now, we all still question, just from what we've seen mechanically, how truly backwards compatible anything will be. Not even necessarily worried about the OGL and the SRD. The backwards compatibility of 1D&D to 5e seems interesting as it is. People were speculating that it might be just tied to the adventures, because adventures are a little easier to convert back, as opposed to, like, mechanics and stat blocks, but either way. So they said they're going to make one, so that's a definite answer. There will be one for One D&D, and they're going to update the system reference document for One D&D as they complete its development. So we're probably not going to see anything until it's complete. Will the OGL terms change? Yes, we will release version 1.1 in early 2023. So that is a fact. They will change it. So coming in 2023. So the one that everybody's been operating under thus far will change. The OGL needs an update to ensure that it keeps doing what it's intended to do. Allow the D&D community independent creators to build and play and grow the game we all love, without allowing things like third parties to mint D&D NFTs and large businesses to exploit our intellectual property. Okay, so what's changing? First, we're making sure that OGL 1.1 is clear about what it covers and what it doesn't. OGL 1.1 makes clear it only covers material created for use in or as TTRPGs, and those materials are only ever permitted as printed media or static electronic files like EPUBs and PDFs. Other types of content like videos and video games are possible through the Wizards of the Coast fan content policy or a custom agreement with us. To clarify, outside of printed media and static electronic files, the OGL doesn't cover it. So that goes ahead. That, I think, explains a little bit of it right there, right? So this talks about things like people who make videos and video-related content like myself and many others. That is not covered under the open game license. This is for people who are making products, printed media, or static electronic files. Now, I do have a question regarding static electronic files. This obviously refers to things like PDFs, but if you errata and update your PDF, or what if you release something on a virtual tabletop, which technically is not a static electronic file, because a virtual tabletop aspect can change a little bit or has nuance changes in it. That may be something for a future conversation, but okay. Will this affect the D&D content and services players use today? It shouldn't. The top virtual tabletop platforms already have custom agreements with Wizards to do what they do. D&D merchandise like minis and novels were never intended to be part of the OGL, and OGL 1.1 won't change that. Creators wishing to leverage D&D for those forms of expression will need, as they always have, custom agreements with us. So if you want to write a D&D novel... Now, minis is interesting. That I didn't recall. So it says... D&D merchandise like minis and novels were never intended to be part of the OGL, and OGL 1.1 won't change that. So, I guess if I'm reading that correctly, if you create miniatures, and it's a D&D based miniature, and it's not something generic, like, I don't know, a dragon. A dragon is, in theory, a very generic mini, but if it, looks like a red dragon, now red dragons might be covered in the open game license, as in it's something in there that you could use, but you can't use it to, I guess you, if I'm understanding this correctly, there's certain things that don't exist in the open game license. For example, beholders, I don't think exist in the open game license, so you can't use beholders as they stand in your product that you're going to sell. But again, I feel like red dragon, we'll use that as an example. If a red dragon is considered in the open game license, and you are a 3D modeler and you create miniatures, and you created a miniature that you created from scratch by yourself of a red dragon, and then you put it on the internet, that allows people to then purchase and buy it, that file to then download and print for yourself, it seems like you can't do that. And I don't know if it ever was, that may have been the case always, but also, again, the same thing with D&D novels. So miniatures and novels are no longer covered under the OGL. You'd have to reach out to Wizards of the Coast and get some sort of custom arrangement to get that to happen. This is also how things like WizKids, for example, can produce all of these D&D miniatures, because they have a custom agreement with Wizards of the Coast. Second, we're updating the OGL to offer different terms to creators who choose to make free, share-alike content and creators who want to sell their products. Okay. What does this mean for you as a creator? If you're making share-alike content, very little is going to change from what you're already used to. If you're making commercial content, relatively little is going to change for most creators. For most of you who are selling custom content, here are the things you'll need to do. Accept the license terms and let us know what you're offering for sale. Report OGL-related revenue annually if you make more than $50,000 in a year. Include a creator product badge on your work. So that's interesting. It seems like we are now, if you're going to do this, you're accepting previously the open game license, and the kind of open D&D whole situation is that there's the license, it exists on the internet. You have that license, the OGL, we'll call it, this is 1.1, we'll call it 1.0, right? Allows you to just create content, right? A lot of people include the open game license terms and, conditions inside their book. You'll see it in like the front cover of DM's Guild products or printed products. But this says, accept the license terms and let us know what you're offering for sale. When I read that, that sounds like a contract that I have to willingly enter into, is what if I'm understanding that correctly. Again, they did say, and I will say, we'll reserve full judgment for anything until we receive sort of the FAQ and the PDFs and all that stuff that they're saying we're going to get in 2023 that's supposed to potentially clarify all this. Again, I'm going to see, like I said, if I can't bring somebody in who's a little bit more of an expert on this kind of information, and maybe that's better reserved for when the open game license itself exists, and we can go through that and get the the legal perspective on it. But report OGL related revenue annually if you make more than $50,000 in a year. So now, not only do you have to accept this license, let them know what you're offering, which I don't know how specific that has to be, but if you make more than $50,000 in a year, you need to now report your revenue to Wizards of the Coast. Now, $50,000 in a year may seem like a lot to some folks, and again, that's not a small amount of money, but think about all the Kickstarters that you've seen or backed for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. How many Kickstarters have you backed that have raised over $100,000? A lot of well-received D&D Kickstarters raise over $50,000, if not more, significantly more than that. So you would now need to produce all of that annual, you'd have to take that revenue and provide it to Wizards of the Coast so that they can see that. That one feels weird to me. And then include a creator product badge on your work. That one's odd, but I guess if you're putting the badge on your work, then you're now admitting to WoTC that you're going to provide them with your financials. Also, I mean, as someone, if you have an independent business and things like that, taxes can be a pain in the butt enough as it is. Now we're adding another revenue kind of release information. When we roll out OGL 1.1, we will also provide explanatory videos, FAQs, and a web portal for registration to make navigating these requirements as easy and intuitive as possible. We also have help available to creators to navigate this new process. So it is going to be a thing, right? There's a portal, a web portal for registration. So it does appear you will have to essentially sign into some sort of contract that you are, in fact, going to use these OGL 1.1 licenses, and you are going to provide your revenue annually to Wizards of the Coast, to the point where they are going to have people available to help walk you through the process, which, again, this can be potentially, there can be all sorts of legal and financial ramifications if you either enter into this and then unknowingly provide misinformation or things like that. This could severely financially impact you in a bad way. So having them have people basically available to help you through the process, that is a good sign. I do appreciate that. And then it says, for the fewer than 20 creators worldwide who make more than $750,000 in income in a year, we will add a royalty starting in 2024. So even for the creators making significant money selling D&D supplements and games, no royalties will be due for 2023, and all revenue will below $750,000 in the future years will be royalty free. So you will have to apparently pay Wizards of the Coast royalties if you make in excess of $750,000 in a year. Now, again, that's a lot of money. I think we can all agree that that's a lot of money, but it's $750,000 in income. Is that, it says income. Now it says creators. Does that mean singular creator? But what about like a company? What about a company with something like Cobalt Press or all these other ones where they're making money, they're doing Kickstarters, they have employees and all this different kind of stuff? I mean, again, how many $1 million Kickstarters have there been for Dungeons and Dragons? A fair few, right? And if you were to then make $1 million on a Kickstarter, you now starting in 2024. Again, if you opt in to the OGL 1.1 license. So seemingly, if you do that and you want to create content for One D&D and you do that and you make in excess of $750,000, you will have to pay royalties starting in 2024. So I think obviously within that thing would be folks like Critical Role, would be folks like MCDM, things like that have raised over $1 million, assuming they opt into the OGL 1.1. Okay? Bottom line, the OGL is not going away. You will still be able to create new D&D content, publish it anywhere, and game with your friends and followers in all the ways that make the game and community so great. The thousands of creators publishing across Kickstarter, DM's Guild, and more are a critical part of the D&D experience, and we will continue to support and encourage them to do that through One D&D and beyond. Now, something that I don't see anywhere in here is what about your existing content within that you've made under the existing OGL. We also don't know what the terms. So let's be real, okay? When I first read this, pretty excited. I read through most of the latter half of this here with all of you, but then I started to think about this a little bit more. Again, you are entering into a contract to publish these things. You have to provide your revenue yearly to Wizards of the Coast. We also, the big thing that'll have to dive into, again, this will probably be something where we pull in legal aspects as well, is where do the rights lie? Right? Because we know if we publish something, say, on the DM's Guild, we lose rights to that. It is no longer our content. Once it goes on the DM's Guild, it's Wizards of the Coast's content. They can do with that whatever they want. If we opt into this OGL 1.1 and decide to do it, are we giving up our rights? And the fact that this is a document that they did say they're going to update it. We don't know if OGL 1.1 will be a static document that exists for 8 years or more, like we saw with the existing OGL, which was put out in 2015 or updated in 2015 and hasn't been changed in 7 years. Or can OGL 1.1 be updated consistently? Now, that has good positive and negative benefits, right? if they update it, that could potentially mean they're going to add content. So, for example, like I've said, for everybody saying, why don't any of these Kickstarters make, subclasses for the Artificer? Well, they can't because the Artificer wasn't included in the open game license from 2015, so they couldn't. So potentially, an updating and evolving open game license could be a good thing in their aspect that they could add stuff to it, which then now becomes things that you can use to make profit on. However, if they're also going to update it in that aspect, who's to say they won't update it to tweak and alter different aspects of it? I don't know. Again, I don't know. Will I sign this? I'm not sure. I'm not really producing content that falls under this. That's the other thing, right? I have been brought on to work on some projects for various folks to write for their Kickstarters or their books that they're putting out, which is fine, and it's all been covered under the original OGL. We'll call, again, what we're calling OGL 1.0 at this point, which didn't have any web portal to offer, to enter into as far as contract goes, no requirements to share your revenue with the parent company. And no, obviously, the creator badge, I think, is probably the throwaway one. That one, it doesn't seem like a big deal to me, but I'm sure there's a reason behind it. Again, and it says fewer than 20 creators worldwide. Again, $750,000 in income. That doesn't necessarily mean profit either, right? Like, you could have $750,000 in income and only $10K in profit because you're paying all of these writers and doing all this stuff, and that's just how it comes out. Again, that's a kind of a wonky example, but it's a thing, right? So that means, I guess someone like Critical Role, MCDM, and others will have to now start paying royalties to Wizards of the Coast in 2024 if they opt into this new OGL. The other thing is, this talks all about OGL 1.1. I'm not sure what their plans are for OGL 1.0. Now, if they're going to make it updated and kind of clear out, does this invalidate OGL 1.0, the things that people have been creating on for the past 7 years? Do you basically have to opt into 1.1 to make content at all and sell it, or can you continue to be covered under OGL 1.0 and continue working on that? I'm not sure, and that's not very much explained here. It clearly, the concern of the community kind of, I don't know how to say forced their hand, but they made a statement to us sooner than they would have originally liked to, and I do appreciate this kind of transparency. This is the thing that I've been asking for from Wizards of the Coast for a long time, and we're seeing that. And I do appreciate that, honestly, all right? We saw with a roadmap for what the book releases we're going to see in 2023 are. Fantastic. We can plan our content around it. You can plan your budget around the books. That's great. We also now are getting these kind of answers. If people have a lot of questions, there's a lot of concern in the community, we have an official statement, a press release answer. This is what I wanted to see, something like this. And we also know in early 2023, we're going to get 1.1, which means in theory, you could start creating for One D&D while it's still being developed, which is also kind of weird, right? If One D&D is still in the development process, you could be creating One D&D content based off of the Unearthed Arcana that we've received thus far, and then put that out. But yeah, the big questions that I have for this going forward, and again, we'll have to wait till we really see things, is where do the rights reside? If you sign into this license, do you still have retain all of the rights for the content you create underneath it? Or is there language in there in such a way that Wizards of the Coast now has rights to your work and can use it as they see fit without, credit or anything of that nature? What happens to OGL 1.0? If I download and save a copy of the open game license that exists right now and decide to continue to create under that, am I covered? Am I safe? Do I have to do all of this revenue share aspect part of it, or revenue release of information? Or if I continue to create under OGL 1.0, am I covered? Will they continue to support 1.0 when 1.1 is released? For example, on, let's say, the DMs Guild, right? You think about all that content. I imagine they'd have to, right? All that content that exists on the DMs Guild currently, a lot of it was produced. Actually, I guess it's all produced on the DMs Guild, so it might be different. But if you had content that was created under 1.0, published on something like the DMs Guild, and 1.1 releases, do I then now need to update my content to 1.1? And in doing so, do I have to then go through all of this? So there are some questions. Good news is it does appear that an open game license will exist going forward, and their goal is to still, as they state in there, to still provide backwards compatibility, and that's good. The other thing I said is I'm curious to see about the merchandise and the minis. That's interesting. So if you're producing, it said D&D merchandise like minis and novels, but that also might be things like T-shirts and hats and mugs and stuff. If people are doing not, and they don't have a specific license with Wizards of the Coast, right? If you don't have a license that allows you to produce content for them, like make T-shirts or whatever, and you're just releasing shirts that aren't generic enough, if that makes sense. Or again, I guess people, I guess possibly were using the open game license to decide what minis they could create. I guess the fact that they reference it specifically makes me feel like that's a thing they're gonna have. That's gonna happen. But all in all, I think it is a positive thing. And the biggest thing I would also say is they're listening to us. A lot of people do have the feelings that Wizards of the Coast doesn't look at feedback, doesn't respond to the community, or when they do, it's so long after the fact that it becomes irrelevant, or irrelevant is the right term. But this is topical at the moment. Things have been trending. People are, conversations are being had, and they decided to come out and give us a press release on the fact that an OGL is going to continue. It's going to be, but again, it is referenced that it is an update to the existing one. So, like I said, there are questions that I have. Hopefully, their explanatory videos, their FAQs, their web portal, all this stuff allows us to be, find out all the information we're looking for, and then you can ultimately decide for yourself. Is this going to be a thing I want to opt into? Again, as a reminder, it is pretty much only for printed media or whatever static electronic files. Again, I think they're specifically referencing PDF versions of that, probably not virtual tabletop. But like, what if you release an adventure directly to a virtual tabletop and don't provide like a PDF to people? How does that fit in? So again, like I said, there are questions. We obviously will be watching this very closely going forward. And once things are in a point where we can, like I said, I would love to have someone who's a little bit more of an expert as far as contracting, licensing, and things like that, and come in to review it from a legality perspective and provide us with a little more insight into what we can expect and what exactly you're going to be signing if you do decide to go into this web portal and register again. So for a lot of creators, again, video-based creators like myself, we're not going to be, doesn't seem to be impacted too much by this. But if you have some video creator out there or some other that has made a Kickstarter and raised a significant amount of money, I mean, if they raised over $50,000, they have to report that revenue to Wizards of the Coast. And if they happen to make over $750,000, then they have to add royalties. I think the Dungeon dudes, their Kickstarter did pretty well. Did it break 750K? If it did, then in 2024 they're going to have to start paying out royalties to Wizards of the Coast. So the good news is, if you happen to make something in 2022 or into 2023, you have that time where you don't have to really worry about this. But going forward from there, if you're opted in, and again, I guess the option is, can you opt out, right? That's the other option, right? Can I continue to create under the things I've been doing in the past? Or if I want to do it, you're going to force me to opt in to the OGL 1.1. So again, thank you all so much for watching. More to come on this for sure. I hope you're all having a wonderful holiday season, and I will see you all next time.